Welcome, the anointed ones. Some people walk into rooms and shift the atmosphere. Chosen ones walk into lives and shift destinies. Let me tell you something that'll make you rethink every random act of kindness you've ever done. Not a business deal, not a merger, not a stock tip, but a person, a soul. Often someone who didn't even know who they were talking to. And guess what? That someone was you. You didn't see the jets, the assets, or the private security. Because God hid it from you on purpose. Why? So that your kindness would be pure, your intentions untouched, and your reward unmatched. While most were chasing clout, you were offering compassion. And while others were busy Googling how to network with the wealthy, you were unknowingly rescuing one from the edge of an emotional, spiritual, or even literal breakdown, with nothing but your authenticity. And the best part? They haven't forgotten you. In fact, they might be looking for you right now. You didn't just leave an impression. You planted a divine signature on their conscience, one they can't shake off, no matter how high they climb. Because for the first time in a long time, someone saw their soul instead of their status. So buckle up, chosen one. Your payback is not coming from a paycheck. It's coming from divine alignment. And who knows, that phone call you've been waiting for might come with a jet. Oh, and if you're wondering if this is too good to be true, well, so was your kindness. And you gave that for free. Let's break this all the way down. Number 1, you gave what you didn't have, and that opened a vault you didn't know existed. You gave when you were the one secretly bleeding. You didn't wait to feel strong, rich, or validated before showing up for someone else. You gave when your own world was crumbling, when no one was clapping, when it felt like no one ever noticed what you did. And that's exactly why it counted in the courts of heaven. Because that moment, when you chose compassion over comfort, wasn't about being nice. It was a divine trigger. You didn't know it, but the person you helped was standing on the edge of something dark. They didn't need another handout, fake smile, or sugar-coated pep talk. They needed someone real, someone grounded, someone who didn't treat them like a dollar sign, a status symbol, or a stepping stone. And without even knowing their background, you gave them what no one else could. Sincerity. You gave out of your emotional poverty, out of your drained spirit, and still managed to pour clean water into someone else's life. That act, that was currency in the spirit. It wasn't loud, it wasn't glamorous, but it was authentic. And heaven doesn't pay according to the noise, it pays according to the weight of intention. You didn't even know you were being watched, not by cameras or crowds, but by the divine realm. That moment was recorded, and here's the twist. You didn't just help a stranger. You unknowingly stepped into your own prophecy. The very person you poured into has more access, power, and influence than they let on. But God blinded your eyes to who they were, so He could test who you are. Now that seed you planted in secret is cracking open. Quietly, explosively, behind closed doors, conversations are being had with your name in them. They're not just thankful, they're in awe. They're saying, "Who was that? Where can I find them?" Because they've had everything money can buy, and still, your presence felt like the rarest gift of all. That's why your reward won't just be a favor, it will be a reversal. God's about to flood you with the very things you gave away: love, peace, favor, and breakthrough. But this time it's coming in high volume, because you gave when you had every reason not to, and heaven never forgets that. Number 2, their money couldn't buy what you gave them. They had everything the world chases: money, status, assets, influence. But you gave them something they couldn't buy on their best day: realness. You didn't know who they were. You weren't trying to network. You weren't performing kindness to be seen. You just treated them like a human being when everyone else either idolized them or used them. And in that moment, your kindness became unforgettable. Not because it was loud, but because it was pure. That's the thing people miss. Billionaires are surrounded by people every day: employees, business partners, advisors, fans, but very few of those people are genuine. Most are either intimidated or trying to get something. You weren't fazed, you didn't shrink, and you didn't try to gain favor. You just showed up with your full heart and offered what they hadn't experienced in years: a moment without an agenda. It could have been the way you spoke to them, how you respected their space, or how you offered help without expecting anything back. Whatever it was, it shook them. Because when you're constantly surrounded by performance, authenticity becomes a shock to the system. You didn't even know your words or energy were healing them, but it was. You weren't trying to impress, but you left an impact they'll never forget. They may have more zeros in their bank account than you've ever seen, but they were bankrupt in ways that actually matter. Trust, connection, safety, truth. And in the moment they met you, even if only for a short while, they felt something they couldn't explain. That's why they remember you. Not because you made a scene, but because you made a difference. They've met thousands of people, but they can't stop thinking about you. Not because you chased their wealth, but because you honored their soul. That left a mark on them. And here's what's wild. They may be figuring out how to return that energy, but not as a simple thank you. They're thinking big. Because when someone wealthy finds something they can't buy, they don't forget it. They protect it, and they invest in it. So don't be surprised when a door opens that you didn't knock on. You didn't ask for a blessing, but your spirit qualified for one. Number 3, you were their divine disruption. They were on the edge of something they couldn't even name. On the outside, they looked fine, successful, composed, powerful. But inside, they were slipping into hopelessness, into spiritual confusion, into the kind of emptiness that no amount of money can fill. And just when it started getting dangerous, you showed up. You didn't come with a spotlight. You came with peace. You didn't come preaching or begging. You came carrying presence. And that moment changed everything. What you thought was just a regular interaction, maybe you gave advice, offered a kind word, helped them out without even knowing who they were, was actually a divine interception. You disrupted a dark timeline they were silently walking into. And because of your energy, your humility, your kindness, they paused. Something inside of them slowed down. Something self-destructive lost momentum. It's not that you fixed their whole life, you just reintroduced light. You gave them a reason to breathe deeper that day. What's crazy is that you didn't know they were important. You didn't know they had connections, power, wealth, or influence. You treated them with the same sincerity you'd give anyone, and that's what shook them the most. Because you didn't adjust your kindness based on their status. You showed up as your true self. And in a world full of fake handshakes and rehearsed empathy, your authenticity was like a spiritual defibrillator. That one moment changed the direction of their life. You may never know the full weight of it, but they do. They remember it. They think about it. And now you're etched into their story, not just as someone who helped, but as the one who intervened. And that kind of divine timing, it never goes unnoticed by heaven or by the one you rescued. So now there's a ripple effect happening behind the scenes. Quiet moves are being made. Silent prayers are being answered. Conversations are unfolding in rooms your feet haven't stepped in yet, all because you showed up with light on the very day darkness was ready to swallow someone whole. Your kindness didn't just help. It rerouted fate. And that kind of impact, it comes back around. Bigger, louder, and more powerful than you can imagine. Number 4, God let you be seen through the eyes of a king. You didn't need to walk in with designer labels, bold titles, or loud declarations. Your presence was enough. You weren't trying to be impressive. You were just being you. But what you didn't realize was that God had already prepared the eyes of someone with power to see you for who you truly are. Not for how you looked, not for what you owned, but for the divine oil you carry. That kind of recognition doesn't come from effort. It comes from favor. That billionaire has met thousands of people, most of them trying to get their attention, to earn their approval, or to get something out of the relationship. You didn't do any of that. You weren't chasing a spotlight. You were walking in alignment. And that alignment speaks louder than a pitch or a polished resume. They saw something in you they couldn't explain, a kind of stillness, a kind of inner wealth that felt bigger than their net worth. It's not that you were the loudest person in the room, it's that you had a kind of weight on you, spiritual weight. When you spoke, there was truth. When you listened, there was healing. And even in your silence, there was presence. That's what made them pause. That's what made them take note. Because they're used to noise. They're used to people faking depth to get close. But with you, there was no pretending. Just purpose. That's when something in their spirit clicked. It wasn't just admiration, it was divine instruction. God whispered, "Honor this one. They carry my oil. They are not common." And that whisper hit different because no matter how wealthy someone is, they still recognize when they're in the presence of something sacred. They saw eternity in your eyes, something timeless, something unshaken by money, status, or opportunity. And once someone of power sees you with spiritual clarity, everything changes. They can't unsee it. They can't forget you. That moment shifts the atmosphere around your name, because you weren't trying to be seen, you were just being faithful. And God made sure you were seen through the eyes of a king. Not to boost your ego, but to open the right door at the right time with the right favor. Number 5, they were testing humanity, and you passed without knowing it. They didn't look like someone important. In fact, they went out of their way to seem average. No luxury watch, no entourage, no signs of status. Some do this on purpose, not out of malice, but out of exhaustion. When you have everything, it becomes nearly impossible to tell who's genuine. So they test people. They dress down. They act uninterested. They ask dumb questions. They even come across as rude or awkward just to see how you'll respond when you think they have nothing to offer. Most people fail the test. They roll their eyes. They dismiss. They treat them with irritation or fake politeness, hoping they're not wasting their time. But you didn't flinch. You weren't trying to impress. You weren't trying to extract anything. You weren't reading the room for opportunity. You were reading the soul in front of you. And what they saw in that moment was everything. You didn't treat them with respect because they looked powerful. You treated them with dignity because that's who you are. And that right there, that heart posture, is rare. It's the kind of character you can't fake. They noticed it. They didn't say much, but they watched. They took mental notes. Because the very thing they were testing for, you had in full supply: integrity. That wasn't just a casual encounter. That was a spiritual and financial test disguised as a stranger. And you passed, not with effort, but with ease, because real goodness doesn't need a script, it flows naturally. And when they saw that in you, it exposed just how hollow most of their interactions have been. Everyone else wants something, you didn't. That shook them, they won't forget it. Because while others stepped over them or underestimated them, you extended grace. And that act, it just positioned you for something bigger than you expected. Not because you kissed up, but because you stayed rooted. The reward for passing that kind of test doesn't come immediately, but when it does, it's abundant. You weren't being observed for style or knowledge. You were being observed for spirit. And heaven smiled while they watched you honor someone you didn't know was watching you right back, with a kingdom behind them. Number 6, your reward was scheduled before you were born. This wasn't a lucky coincidence or a random moment. This was alignment. You didn't stumble into that interaction by accident. Long before you ever arrived at that location, long before you even knew what path your life would take, this encounter was written into your story. You were pre-assigned, sent, positioned with precision. And the reason it didn't feel forced was because your spirit was already prepared for it, even if your mind wasn't. You didn't come to beg, flatter, or chase opportunity. You didn't even know who they were. That's how you know it was divine. Because if you had known, you might have acted differently. God made sure your eyes were shielded just enough so you'd show up authentically, without pressure, without performance. Your job wasn't to impress them, it was to activate something inside them. And that activation was bigger than both of you. When you spoke, when you gave, when you listened, when you simply showed them care without an agenda, you triggered a buried part of them that had been sleeping for years. Maybe they forgot what compassion felt like. Maybe they stopped believing in divine timing. Maybe they thought all genuine people had disappeared. But then you walked in, quietly, humbly, powerfully, and something in their spirit turned back on. That moment wasn't for clout. It wasn't for attention. It was a divine exchange. You didn't see it, but the heavens did. Because when you activated their buried humanity, their buried faith, their buried purpose, You unlocked something that had been waiting in the spiritual realm to be released to you. A reward, a breakthrough, a shift, and it was never meant to be delayed. This wasn't a reward that came because of the billionaire. It came because of your obedience, your ability to love without knowing the outcome, your willingness to honor someone who didn't look the part. You were just doing what came naturally to your spirit, but the result was supernatural. What you didn't know is that the blessing attached to that act had your name on it before your first breath. It's not coming because you earned it. It's coming because heaven scheduled it, and now the alarm just went off. Number 7. You weren't nice. You were obedient. What you did wasn't just about being nice. This wasn't about manners or politeness or keeping up a good image. What you did came from a deeper place, a response to a quiet, undeniable pull in your spirit. You didn't help that person because it was convenient. You didn't show compassion because you were trying to look good. You responded to a voice that didn't come from you. It came from above. People often think kindness means being soft or being passive or allowing yourself to be walked over. But your kindness didn't come from fear. It came from obedience. You moved with authority, even if it didn't look like it on the outside. When you felt that tug to speak, to step in, to offer something when no one else would, you didn't reason your way out of it. You obeyed. And that one moment may have seemed small to you, but it was a massive signal in the spirit realm. God wasn't testing your manners. He was testing your sensitivity to His voice. That divine nudge wasn't random. It was a command hidden in the language of intuition. And when you said yes, when you leaned in instead of turning away, you shifted more than just the atmosphere around you. You shifted a whole timeline. Your obedience disrupted something dark and released something powerful. That person you helped, you didn't know what they were carrying. You didn't know what decision they were wrestling with, what danger they were headed toward, or how close they were to giving up on people entirely. But God knew, and He sent you. Not someone louder, not someone more famous. You. Because He knew you would respond to the whisper others would ignore. And now, that moment is echoing in places you can't see. Conversations are happening. Blessings are being moved into place. Delays are being removed. Not because you were trying to make a name for yourself, but because you were willing to act when most people would stay silent. That wasn't weakness. That wasn't just being a nice person. That was spiritual warfare disguised as compassion. And heaven rewards that kind of obedience every single time. Number 8. They went home and told someone about you, and that person holds a key to your future. You thought it was just a moment, a brief encounter, a simple act of kindness that faded as quickly as it came. But that moment didn't end. It traveled. It followed them home. It sat with them long after you walked away. And they couldn't keep it to themselves. You stirred something in them that needed to be shared. So they told someone. Not just anyone, but someone who holds influence, someone who holds access, someone who holds a key. They mentioned your name over dinner. Maybe casually, maybe with emotion, maybe with disbelief at how real you were in a world full of actors. But they remembered your face, your words, your spirit, and they shared it with someone they trust, someone who has power, someone who can open doors most people don't even know exist. That person, they told, they're not impressed by credentials, they're moved by stories. They're not looking for resumes, they're looking for real. And your story, the way you treated someone without knowing who they were, was exactly what they needed to hear. You didn't pitch yourself. You didn't hand out business cards. You didn't drop hints. But your name still made it into the right room. Now, something is moving behind the scenes. Quietly. Strategically. The lock is already turning. The person they spoke to is curious now. They're looking into you, asking around, maybe even watching you from a distance. Not to judge, but to confirm. To see if what they heard matches what they feel. And when they find out that it does, that you're the real thing, that door is going to swing wide open. What you thought was over is still unfolding. You planted a seed that multiplied. Your kindness didn't just impact one person, it's activating your next level. And the best part, you didn't have to force it, you didn't chase it, you just were yourself. And that was enough for your name to be carried into rooms where decisions are made. You don't even know what's coming, but someone does. And they're already getting ready to bless you in a way that only divine timing could orchestrate. Number 9. You showed them the currency they hadn't touched in years: purity. They've traded in everything the world calls valuable. They've moved numbers most people can't even imagine: stocks, crypto, oil, gold. Their hands have touched every form of currency, except the one you carry. Purity. And when you stepped into their space, you didn't bring status or strategy. You brought something their money couldn't buy, their power couldn't command, and their position couldn't manufacture. You brought an unbought, unshaken spirit. They weren't expecting it. They didn't even know they needed it. But your presence disrupted something inside them. It made them uncomfortable in the best way. It made them remember who they used to be before the greed, the competition, and the survival mode. You reminded them what it felt like to be seen without suspicion, helped without strings, and spoken to without ego. And that hit harder than any boardroom deal they've ever made. Because deep down they're not numb, they're just tired. Tired of manipulation, tired of pretending, tired of never knowing who's genuine. And then came you. Not trying to get anything, not putting on a performance, just being. And in that stillness, in that sincerity, you reintroduced them to a currency they had forgotten existed. You weren't trying to convert them, but they were changed, not religiously, spiritually. They saw the divine in you, and it made them want to reconnect with something higher than themselves. That's why they're not just grateful, they're moved. You didn't just offer kindness. You exposed them to a frequency that can't be faked, the frequency of truth, the frequency of God's presence. Now they're thinking differently. You may never hear the conversations, but behind closed doors, they're planning something, not out of guilt, but out of reverence. Your name keeps coming up, not because you asked for recognition, but because you carried something rare, something holy, something that reminded them of their soul. And now they want to give back. Not with applause, with action, financial action, strategic action, legacy-level action. Because when a person of great wealth finally touches something eternal, their first instinct is to protect it, to honor it, to invest in it. And that's exactly what they're about to do for you. Number 10. Your humility was so loud, it silenced their ego. They walked in assuming they were the biggest presence in the room. That's how it usually goes. People adjust themselves to their energy, their title, their wealth, but not you. You didn't flinch, you didn't shrink, and you didn't overcompensate. You stayed grounded, centered, unshaken. While others tried to impress them, you remained steady because you weren't trying to be impressive. You were just real. And that quiet confidence, it dismantled their ego without a single confrontation. You didn't try to compete. You didn't try to match their influence. You didn't even bring attention to yourself, but your humility was loud. Not the kind that begs for pity, the kind that comes from deep inner knowing. You didn't need to prove yourself. And in a world where people perform their value, your calm presence became the most disruptive energy in the room. Something shifted inside them. At first they couldn't put their finger on it. They're used to dominating spaces, but for once they felt small, not in shame, but in awe. Because the real weight wasn't in their wallet, it was in your spirit. And in that moment, without knowing how or why, the power dynamic flipped. Not because you demanded it, but because you carried it. They realized they were standing in front of someone who doesn't need to be seen to have presence. Someone who doesn't have to shout to be heard. Someone who doesn't chase approval, because they walk with purpose. That realization didn't just humble them, it exposed the cracks in their own foundation. And now, they can't forget you. But more than that, they feel indebted, not because you asked for anything, but because something inside of them recognizes they encountered something rare. And that kind of moment lingers. It replays. It reconfigures their sense of what matters, and deep down they know they walked away with something they didn't earn, your grace. So now the emotional debt is stirring, quietly, powerfully, not out of guilt, but out of honor. Because when someone touches something sacred, something holy, something untouched by ego, they don't walk away unchanged. They start thinking about how to give back. And what they're planning for you? It won't be small. Number 11, you altered their legacy with a sentence. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a lecture. It wasn't even something you planned. You spoke one sentence, a simple truth, maybe even casually, but it carried weight. And the moment they heard it, something inside them cracked open. It wasn't just that your words made sense, it was the timing. It was what they needed to hear, right when their soul was at a crossroads. Most people speak to impress. You spoke from alignment. You weren't trying to sound wise. You weren't trying to be deep, but your spirit was tuned into something higher, and what came out of your mouth cut through all the noise they were drowning in. That sentence hit them harder than any investment report, life coach, or strategy session ever could. It confronted them. Not in a harsh way, but in a way that revealed. It made them see the lie they were living, the fear they were covering up, the cycles they were passing down without realizing it. You didn't just give advice, you shifted perspective. You helped them see beyond their wealth into what they were actually building and what they were about to leave behind. And that's what changed everything, because for someone who's seen all the money in the world, legacy is the final mountain. Not how much they own, but what they're remembered for, who they influenced, what they passed on. And in that moment, your words did something their bank account couldn't. You didn't just say something smart. You activated something generational. You flipped a switch that will now affect how they lead, how they love, how they raise their children, how they see people, how they give. All from one sentence, one moment, one seed. That's why they can't let you go, because they know you weren't just a random voice. You were a divine interruption. And now they want to tie you to their legacy, not as a footnote, but as a foundation. Someone they'll honor not just with words, but with action, with influence, with wealth. Because what you gave in one sentence is now going to echo through generations. Number 12. You were the stranger they secretly prayed for. They didn't tell anyone, but they were struggling, not with money or opportunity, but with connection, with trust, with weariness. They'd reached a place where everything around them felt artificial. They were surrounded by people who smiled for the cameras, nodded in meetings, and praised them in public, yet none of it felt real. Deep down, they were isolated. They had everything, and yet felt unseen. So they prayed, quietly, desperately. In a moment no one knew about, they whispered something like, "God, just send me someone real, someone who isn't trying to use me, someone who sees me, not my status." That wasn't a business request. That was a soul cry. And you became the answer to that cry. You didn't come with expectations. You weren't trying to sell them something. You weren't even aware of who they were. And that's what made your presence powerful. You weren't reacting to their wealth. You were responding to their humanity. You didn't treat them like a title or a transaction. You treated them like a soul. That stunned them, because they'd gotten so used to being watched, judged, envied, or pursued. But you didn't do any of that. You listened, you smiled, you gave, even if it was just time or attention. And something about you made them feel like they could breathe again. For a moment they weren't a billionaire. They were a person, and that moment healed something. They didn't need another strategist, partner, or fan. They needed someone pure, and your authenticity became a mirror they hadn't looked into for years. It reminded them of who they used to be, of the dreams they buried, of the child inside them, who just wanted to be seen for who they really are. That's why they remember you. That's why they keep thinking about you, because you were their answered prayer. And now heaven is getting ready to answer yours. The moment you showed up in obedience and honesty, the spiritual balance shifted. Because when you help carry someone else's silent burden, the weight of your own begins to lift. And now you're about to walk into favor you didn't chase, because you became a vessel God could use when someone powerful needed something no amount of money could buy. Someone real. Number 13. The help you gave wasn't physical. It was spiritual surgery. You thought you were just being kind, just offering a word of encouragement, just being present in a moment that didn't seem extraordinary at all. But what really happened in that moment was far deeper. It wasn't physical. It wasn't emotional. It was spiritual. You didn't just comfort them. You intervened. You stepped into a space where something dark was gaining ground. And without even knowing it, you shut it down. They were standing at the edge of something dangerous, maybe not visibly. Maybe they looked composed, successful, even calm. But spiritually, they were unraveling. Something had been gnawing at their peace for years. Trauma, guilt, generational cycles, unhealed wounds, spiritual oppression. And just as it was tightening its grip, you showed up. You didn't come swinging with scriptures or quoting sermons. You came carrying presence. You came with words that pierced through confusion. You came with energy that cut through the fog. You didn't need a title to operate in power. You were functioning in divine assignment, and your spirit went to work before your mind even caught up. What you said, or even what you didn't say, snapped something. It pulled them back from a path that would have ended in spiritual ruin. You may never know the details, but they do. They felt it. Something broke. A heaviness lifted. A lie lost its power. A curse ran out of room to operate. That moment wasn't just about comfort. It was about deliverance. You did surgery without a scalpel. You uprooted something ancient without even knowing it. And now there's a ripple effect moving in the spirit. Because when you pull someone out of spiritual danger, heaven responds aggressively, not with a thank you, but with a release. You didn't just bless them, you broke something off of them. And when you break a curse in someone else's life, God starts dealing with the curses trying to follow you. That's why the shift that's coming in your life won't just be personal. It will be generational. Because what you did wasn't small. It was spiritual warfare disguised as kindness. And heaven keeps score differently. You didn't save their money, you helped save their soul. And now God is about to honor that in a way no man can block. Number 14. Your role wasn't to impress. It was to impart. You weren't meant to wow them. You weren't sent to perform or to prove anything. Your assignment wasn't to compete with their wealth, status, or intellect. It was simpler, but far more powerful. You were sent to impart, to leave a residue of heaven in a space where emptiness had been echoing. You carried something they didn't even know they needed until you were already in their presence. They've been surrounded by brilliance. They've sat across from world leaders, CEOs, tech giants, spiritualists, strategists, and influencers. But despite all that noise, they were still starving for something real. Not more information, not more adoration. They were craving substance, something eternal. And that's where you came in. You didn't bring a pitch. You brought a presence. You weren't trying to dazzle them. You were just being obedient to the weight God placed inside you. That weight is called oil. And when you carry oil, you don't need to chase the stage. The stage comes to you. That moment, that conversation, that chance encounter wasn't about networking, it was about activation. When they met you, something leapt in them. Maybe it was peace they hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was clarity they'd been chasing. Maybe it was conviction they didn't even know they needed. But something shifted. Your presence unlocked something ancient. Not because you tried to, but because oil naturally breaks yokes. You didn't force the moment. You fulfilled it. That billionaire didn't need another person asking for access. They needed someone carrying assignment. That's what they saw in you. They may not have had the language for it, but their spirit recognized it instantly. And now they feel a divine urge to pour into you. Not to impress you, not to buy your loyalty, but because their spirit knows. You're connected to their next chapter. This isn't payment, it's prophecy. You were never sent to ask them for anything. You were sent to impart something that money couldn't give them. And now they're about to pour into you in ways that look like favor, but really, they're just responding to what heaven already arranged. Your presence delivered something eternal. And now, eternity is about to bless you back. Sometimes, the most powerful moments in your life don't come with fireworks. They come in stillness, in obedience, in kindness that feels ordinary, but carries extraordinary weight. You didn't chase fame, wealth, or applause. You simply followed the whisper of God. You treated someone with dignity, not knowing heaven was watching. You poured oil, not realizing you were igniting legacy. You gave what others overlook, purity, presence, humility, and in return, you unlocked something massive. This wasn't just a chance meeting. It was a divine collision. That billionaire didn't just see you, They recognized you, not with their eyes, but with their spirit. You weren't performing for them. You were sent to impart something sacred. And now, because you passed the test without even knowing you were in one, the heavens have released what was stored up for you all along. You saved someone powerful without asking for power. You healed someone wealthy without asking for wealth. But now the tables are turning. The seeds you sowed in purity are being harvested in favor. The doors you didn't knock on are opening. The legacy you quietly impacted is now circling back to honor yours. So get ready, not for attention, but for divine compensation. Because when God orchestrates an encounter like this, the reward is never small. It's generational, it's spiritual, it's prophetic, and it's already on the way. If this message stirred something deep within you, don't let it stop here. Hit that subscribe button and join a growing tribe of awakened souls who know they're not average, they're anointed. Tap like if this confirmed something you've been feeling but couldn't put into words. Drop a comment and let us know what resonated most. We read them all. And don't keep this revelation to yourself. Share it with someone you know carries quiet greatness, but needs the reminder that heaven hasn't forgotten them. This channel is more than content. It's confirmation. And your next confirmation could be in the very next video. Stay locked in. Stay aligned. Stay chosen. God bless you. God bless.